When analyzing film or any kind of media, whenever you're delivering any form of criticism, an important thing is to set your own personal subjectivity aside and try to remain as objective as possible when analyzing or talking about whatever it is that you're going to critique. I've actually long since posed the idea that such objectivity is impossible. That despite you putting your best effort forward, you can't 100% be objective. That no matter what you do, whatever you're critiquing is always going to be informed by your own personal biases. It really just depends on how far you are willing to go, how fair you are willing to be to that which you're critiquing, if you can't fully set your own biases aside. Hello, everybody. I am the Linkzilla, and I just got back from Jurassic World Dominion. This is probably the most anticipated film of this year, and I gotta admit that the last 4 years I have basically been waiting for this film in such anticipation because I was so incredibly excited about where the Jurassic Park franchise was going to go after Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I couldn't wait to see what this movie had in store, and I have basically been following it ever since the last one came out. And it was a bit disheartening when the pandemic started because Jurassic World Dominion was one of the projects that had to be delayed because of the pandemic, but I remember seeing that Dominion was one of the first that actually returned to production despite the pandemic. So it just kind of felt like Jurassic Park. You just couldn't keep it down. It wanted to proceed. Life wanted to find a way. So, now that we have Jurassic World Dominion and I have seen it, what are my thoughts on it? That's the $1,000,000 question. I gotta admit, people, that it's actually taken me a while to quantify, to put into words what I'm about to say about the movie, because, well, it's been hours since I got back from the movie, and I'm really trying to basically prevent all the unnecessary things that happened to me today out of my head, because I'm hoping that is not affecting how I view the movie. I actually, putting the cards on the table, I'm actually suffering from a pretty bad toothache right now, and it's been plaguing me for the last, God knows how long, 24 hours. So, barely got any sleep last night, had to basically deal with work today, on top of going to see the movie, with pain medication just barely taking the edge away from this nonsense. But still, I'm trying to not let that affect me. I'm going to try and keep this little ramble both short and spoiler free, because what can I say about Jurassic World Dominion? Well, it's a Jurassic Park movie. It is a Jurassic Park movie, and if that is what you're looking for, you're definitely going to be entertained by it. It's definitely a very spectacular movie with really great action scenes and action sequences. There are times where you're going to be at the edge of your seat, excited to see where the movie is going to go next. There are times where you're going to jump. There are times where the dinosaurs are actually going to be scary. There are times where you're actually going to be really invested in seeing whether or not the main characters are actually going to get through or not. And this Jurassic Park movie does have a lot of twists and turns that are very in keeping with the franchise, and it does have a lot of outside the box thinking that the franchise is known for. I'm not really going to go into details because I'm going to try and keep this spoiler free, but as far as I'm concerned, this Jurassic World Dominion movie, it's a very exciting and very good movie. I haven't watched the video all the way through yet, but I managed to catch the first few minutes of OmniViewer's little unscripted reaction to the movie, and he says that he had a lot of fun in the movie. And I sense that if you're really just looking to have some fun, you will enjoy yourself at the movies watching this. That being said, honestly, I think that Jurassic World Dominion probably has the most flaws out of any Jurassic World movie that has come thus far. I really do wonder if it's a curse of being the third entry in a trilogy, because really, maybe it's the expectations to have on the shoulders, or maybe it's honestly because maybe the filmmakers just weren't in the right mindset with the film that they're making. Now, don't get me wrong, Jurassic World and Fallen Kingdom, they both have a significant amount of flaws, so your enjoyment of the movie is going to depend on whether or not you're willing to forgive those flaws. Me, who recognizes what Jurassic World and Fallen Kingdom were doing, I'm more than willing to forgive those flaws. So how does Jurassic World Dominion hold up compared to them? Honestly, I'm thinking that Dominion is going to be one of the films I'm going to have to go back and see a few times in theaters to make sure that I'm able to really just get into the plot. What I basically said is that it's a Jurassic Park movie, but it's a certain kind of Jurassic Park movie. And when you go from Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom to a movie like this, I can't help but feel like what we got is sort of a reaction to how Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom was perceived. Because I literally said it back when Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom came out. Fallen Kingdom was probably the smartest blockbuster movie that we had since The Dark Knight, because of a whole lot of factors. One of the things that is really going to get the attention of die-hard Jurassic Park fans like myself is the fact that Jurassic World and Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom are taking a whole lot of inspiration from the Jurassic Park novels. They are bringing back ideas that didn't initially make it into the original movie, and they are doing, not necessarily doing a new spin on them, but bringing them to their logical conclusion. And because the original Jurassic Park is written so well, not just as this exciting action adventure of people on an island with dinosaurs, but as a masterclass of intellectual subtext and criticism of the field of scientific genetic engineering, and poor mismanagement of a theme park, it's able to grip you and basically make you think about things. That's the most important thing that I said about both Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and The Lost World Jurassic Park. They make you think. And that's where I'm sort of beginning to realize there's a huge parallel between the Jurassic Park trilogy and the Jurassic World trilogy. I mean, it's almost like what George Lucas would say about the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. It's like poetry. They rhyme. The first entry in the trilogy is about people going to a park setting where the dinosaurs are on display for people to basically see and look at. That's Jurassic Park and it's Jurassic World. But because the people in charge aren't considering the consequences of what could go wrong, they're completely unprepared to deal with the situation when something does go wrong. And eventually it does. Everything goes wrong, everything falls out of control, and the park has to be shut down, with the animals free to roam the island. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and The Lost World Jurassic Park, they both sort of feature the idea of returning to this hostile environment, seeing how much more dangerous it is, and worse, taking the animals off the island and bringing them to the mainland. The Lost World had all that condensed at the very end, with that ultimately being the point of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. But there is a similar parallel there, because it really does feel like Fallen Kingdom is the same level, the same caliber, with the same attitude as the Lost World Jurassic Park. And that same sort of, I guess, sort of bitter cynicalness to it. But it ends on such an optimistic and hopeful upturn that you can't help but not be hopeful in spite of that, because the animals get a chance to live. It's going to cause a whole lot of consequences, but they get to live. Jurassic Park 3 and Jurassic World Dominion, they are adventures. They are thrill rides. They are a great way to just sit back and have a little bit of fun. And, well, with Jurassic Park 3, it's so short that compared to the other movies in the franchise, you could just put it on and just enjoy it, and it's basically going to be over before you know it. You just basically watch through the movie, and it's going to be quick and easy. And it's pretty much just designed to look louder, spectacular, and with more teeth. Now, don't get me wrong, Jurassic Park 3, I'm not saying it's a bad movie, but I am saying that it is the least out of the entire franchise. However, it might have a bit of a competition for that spot in light of the release of this movie. What I'm basically saying is that, unlike Fallen Kingdom, this movie doesn't exactly make you think. If anything, this movie, well, I feel like this movie tried to play catch-up a little bit. Almost like they couldn't necessarily do what they wanted to do with this movie without fudging a few details first. Like, perhaps maybe this movie should have been a movie that came after another movie between Fallen Kingdom and this one, that maybe sort of dealt more with the consequences, because like what I said about in all the other movies, this movie is about consequences. To me, however, it almost sort of feels like the consequences are dealt with a little too easily, and now we've got a new problem to deal with. Going back to what I talked about with the books, every single Jurassic Park film in the series, in some special way, is taking part of the adaptation process of the original Jurassic Park novel. And that's what made being a fan of Jurassic Park so exciting 4 years ago for its 25th anniversary and the release of Fallen Kingdom, because we knew that that's what the filmmakers were doing, and we were excited for it. We were all for it. Malcolm's dialogue from Fallen Kingdom is literally lifted from the novel itself, which makes me realize that that's the reason. That's the reason why Malcolm in Fallen Kingdom actually feels like how he is supposed to feel from Jurassic Park the novel. It's the one movie that's actually gotten his personality right. But that is a topic for another time. So we were excited about that because it made us basically feel excited that fans of the novel were finally getting their time in the sun. The problem is that with Fallen Kingdom, the end result is the epilogue of Jurassic Park the novel, where all the dinosaurs have gotten loose on the mainland. So where do you go from there? That's how the original Jurassic Park novel ends, with the discovery that some dinosaurs managed to escape the destruction of Isla Nublar and are now spreading through Central America. And that's where we end on the novel. The idea that Grant and the others are being detained in Costa Rica until they can figure out what they can do about these animals. So the question is, where do you go from there if you're out of material? Well, the most logical conclusion is that if you basically have run out of material from the original Jurassic Park novel to adapt, which they haven't, by the way, there's still so many ideas that they could adapt from that novel in context, they could easily just start adapting from the Lost World novel, because the Lost World, it really is it's so different from the movie. The book and the movie are so different that you could almost get a whole new film out of ideas from the Lost World alone, and that would basically be able to make a whole entire movie. And so that's what we thought that they were going to do, especially with the introduction of Lewis Dodgson. For those of you who don't know, or just not keeping track, or for those of you who have very short attention spans, which, let's face it, most of the detractors of the Jurassic Park franchise are, Dodgson is that guy from the first Jurassic Park movie who shows up in Costa Rica, has lunch with Dennis Nedry, played by Wayne Knight, and who gives him the $500,000 in cash and the Barbasol can of shaving cream that he uses to smuggle the dinosaur embryos off Isla Nublar. Dodgson was the guy who paid Nedry to sabotage Jurassic Park. He is the guy who is responsible for the destruction of Jurassic Park in the long run, at least in the movie. In the novels, it was basically going to boil over eventually, and Nedry was just one of several catalysts that allowed the chain reaction to occur. But in the movie, the park seems more stable than it is in the novels. So had Dodgson not interfered, had he not cultivated Nedry into becoming an industrial saboteur for him, Jurassic Park probably could have succeeded, and that's where we see in Jurassic World Dominion. But not Jurassic World Dominion, in the original Jurassic World, the fact that the park can work as long as the people who are there aren't going to sabotage it. But, so, it came as such a genuine and welcome surprise to fans of the novel, especially me, with the revelation that Lewis Dodgson was going to be featured as the main antagonist of this movie. And you knew he was going to be the main antagonist if you knew even half of the things about Dodgson from the novels than there is to know. Now, here's effectively why I say I have to put my own personal biases and subjectivity aside the best that I can in order to give this movie the utmost benefit of the doubt. I honestly don't think there's anyone else in the world I relate to more right now than the Dom from Lost in Adaptations. Dominic, he makes his entire channel about taking popular movies that are based off of a work of literature and comparing them as adaptations. And one of his earliest videos back in the day was Jurassic Park, the movie to the novel. And so I feel like if he and I were to talk, I would basically have to explain it that Jurassic World, the Jurassic Park franchise, the entirety of the franchise, adapts one piece of the novel at a time per movie. So, effectively speaking, when I watched The Dom, I basically could sense that there was a bias leaning towards in favor of the novel, and this sort of unwillingness to compromise, that whenever something from the novel is changed for the movie, it's always basically to the movie's detriment, and he only ever really defended the novel without really considering why the movie had to make those changes. So that's basically where I am right now, because effectively speaking, as a fan of both the Jurassic Park novel and the Lost World novel, which both feature Lewis Dodgson, as well as most of the other stuff that comes in those books, I have to say that I fundamentally disagree with most, if not everything, that happened in this movie. And that's what's honestly so upsetting, because we honestly felt going into this that these movies were being made as for fans of Crichton's original books. But it seems to me like going into Jurassic World Dominion, well, it just sort of feels like our time is over, because I can sense that this movie was made for a more general audience. I hesitate to use the word dumbed down, because I don't think that this movie is dumb, but like I said, it's not as stimulating in an intellectual fashion as the previous movies were. So, I mentioned all this starting to talk about Dodgson. I can't really go into too much detail without spoiling, but I wholeheartedly say that of all the resources that they had when making this movie, Dodgson was undoubtedly the most underutilized. If you go back and basically watch my Where's the Hype video for Jurassic World Dominion, you know Dodgson was not to be trifled with. He was scary. The way that he behaves in the novels, he was downright terrifying. If you were left alone in a room with Lewis Dodgson, your life was in danger in a variety of ways. Because Dodgson, in the novels, he's not only cruel and petty, he's also equal parts pragmatic and sadistic, meaning that he's going to figure out a way to kill you in the most efficient way possible just to cover his tracks, and in a sick way, he's going to enjoy doing it. Yeah, Dodgson really is the bad guy in the entire Jurassic Park franchise, which is a thing to say considering that in the first movie, he only has a few chapters devoted to him at the very beginning, doesn't appear for the rest of the novel, and the novel gets handed over to where the bad guys, which are Hammond and other irresponsible parties at Engine, he comes back in the Lost World novel in a spectacular way, which is where we get most, if not all, of his personality, and where I was hoping this movie would draw a whole lot of inspiration from. Instead, Dodgson feels like they're making some kind of commentary on Steve Jobs. I mean, I'm talking like in the most superficial way possible. That seems to be the only sort of thing I'm getting from the way Dodgson is dressed, and how he behaves is just, well, it's confusing to say the least. I feel like I really can't explain it without going into details, but Dodgson, unfortunately, he's in the same boat as Ian Malcolm in this franchise, a character who has been fundamentally misunderstood and misrepresented by the people who've made the movies, which is somewhat fitting because Ian Malcolm and Dodgson have this scene in the movie where they represent the opposing ideological factions, and they actually are confronting each other on this. And I enjoyed that as a fan of the novels because you realize that in The Lost World, Ian is basically on the camp side of the main protagonists. Dodgson is the main antagonist, and it's sort of they sort of have this relationship with Dodgson following Ian Malcolm, trying to figure out what he knows to try and find Isla Sorna, Site B. So in a lot of ways, Dodgson is basically the Moriarty to Malcolm's Sherlock Holmes, which is really something special to consider, considering that Malcolm and Dodgson never meet face-to-face in the Lost World novel, which is something that people have criticized over. So seeing them face-to-face, it was kind of a treat, but ultimately it just sort of... it really wasn't as good as it really should have been. It wasn't used to its fullest extent. And speaking of such, a whole lot of things have to be said about what I basically anticipated about with this movie and what we ended up getting. The legacy characters of the original trio from the first Jurassic Park movie being reunited on film for the first time in nearly 30 years. Well, seeing Sam Neill reprise his role as Dr. Grant, it was a treat, and I of course loved it. I've loved seeing him on film. Laura Dern, the best part about it is that the movie didn't do anything to alienate someone like me from watching this movie. At least I don't think that it intended to, but the best part about it is that there doesn't seem to be a moment in the movie where Laura Dern becomes a talking figurehead for a certain political group. But then again, just because it doesn't have cringy dialogue like that, doesn't mean that that narrative is fully 100% gone, but I'll have to save that for when I get to a spoiler take on this movie. The bigger problem that I have with with their take on this film is that, well, I fundamentally disagree with a lot of decisions that were made for this movie, and that includes utilizing these three characters. They get a lot more screen time than I was anticipating, because you realize that there are two parallel plots running in this movie that follow Owen, Claire, and their group, the people from Jurassic World, and then you have Ellie, Satler, Dr. Grant, and Malcolm, the original trio from Jurassic Park, doing their own thing, and the two plots eventually converge into each other. And so they get just as much screen time as the new cast of characters, and that's something that I anticipated. That's something that I appreciated, too. The thing that I can say about it is that I'm not 100% sure that the film utilized them to the best of their ability. One of the things that I found so shocking is how they used Ian Malcolm in this movie. Effectively speaking, I can't go into details about it, but when Malcolm is first introduced in the movie, it is so shocking what he is doing that I honestly was sitting there in the theater thinking, Malcolm would never. That is how much I know this character, and that is how shocking it was to learn where he was and what he was doing. More importantly, who he was working for. But it's necessary for the plot because you realize that Malcolm is sort of working in deep cover, and he's only been doing it for a short amount of time. The problem is that, well, from what I know about the characters from the novel, everyone should have anticipated that he'd be doing that, because Malcolm from the novel would want nothing to do with a place like this. And despite how different they are, Malcolm from the movies, everyone should know that he would want nothing to do with a place like this as well. So the idea that he's there, working there, seemingly willingly, should have immediately been suspect. It really is kind of like one of those situations where you have to acknowledge to yourself that you as an audience member and me as a book reader have privileged information that the characters in the movie world don't have. The problem really comes in is that you can't help but think they should have this information, since it's basically been a facet for the last 30 years now. It's nearly been 30 years and they still haven't figured that about him. Keeping on Jeff Goldblum as Dr. Ian Malcolm, I love Jeff Goldblum. I really do. He has that funny, quirky, eccentric way of basically acting and behaving, and he has a pretty cool action scene in the movie. And I gotta admit, I was on the edge of my seat whenever I saw him or any of the three original characters in danger, because I realized that compared to Chris Pratt, Dallas Bryce Howard, and all the new characters, these ones, the legacy ones, are the most expendable. So I was on the edge of my seat about whether or not they were going to die, but that would be going into spoilers. So they do what they do is a pretty good job, but, well, like I said, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom was the only movie in the franchise to actually do Dr. Malcolm's character right, and that's really because most, if not all, his dialogue is taken from the novels, lifted wholesale. So, now that we're no longer focusing on adapting the books, Malcolm is sort of back to being a caricature of what he used to be. And in a lot of ways, this caricature of Malcolm in this life or death situation that we have, it kind of comes off as the movie really didn't know what to do with him. And that's ultimately a big consequence that happens once the two plots meet and converge with each other. That once you get the new characters, the old characters start taking a back seat, and it's like the movie just didn't really know what to do with them. And unfortunately, the biggest offender of all this is the character that they really didn't know what to do with from the get-go, who, honestly, I cannot believe I'm saying this, could have been removed from the movie entirely. And that is, unfortunately, Sam Neill as Dr. Alan Grant. Now, Sam, I love you. I really do. And you were only able to do with what you were given in this movie. But effectively speaking, a big problem that I have with the movie is that Dr. Grant didn't feel necessary. And you could sort of feel that because in most of the scenes that he's in, he's largely there for comedic purposes. He's now the grumbling old man who is basically the stick in the mud in the background, or he's basically there just to, I guess, facilitate the other characters in their quest to do what they need to do. The problem that I foresee with it is that Grant himself has no real autonomy in this movie. But I'm trying to determine if that's a bad thing or not, because really, when you get down to it, Grant is doing what he has always done in these movies, which is he's just there for the ride. He's going along for the ride when you think about it, because I think that maybe it's because in the first Jurassic Park movie, because he was the main lead, he sort of fumbled it backwards into the role of being the main action star of the movie, when, well, for Sam Neill, it's not the kind of typical role that he was playing, but he did that because he had two kids whose lives depended on him, and he wanted to save them. And, well, he ended up doing that. But the point is that Dr. Grant didn't come to Jurassic Park to be an action star. He came there as a paleontological consultant to see if the park was safe or not. So he just went along for the ride because Hammond was offering him roughly 50,000 a year for 3 years, so basically 150,000 up front for just 3 days worth of work. So in Jurassic Park 3, he literally gets kidnapped. He wanted nothing to do with Jurassic Park or InGen ever again, and they lie to him, saying that they want him to guide a tour from the safety of an airplane, but they land on the island because they're actually looking for their son. It's an impromptu rescue mission, and they wanted to exploit his expertise with the animals. And even though we're following him as the main action lead, he's largely just going along for the ride. It's like what he tells Eric in the movie. Your parents, invited me along. With this movie, well, it just sort of seems like it's largely the same. Ellie recruits him because of the main issue of the plot, which I can't go into because of spoilers, but I gotta admit, the main thing that's going wrong in the movie is kind of cool, and I really do think that it's a nice twist, but I'll have to talk about that at a later time. Ellie basically comes to him and recruits him because she needs his help, but it's not because Grant inherently has something special about him or has an area of expertise that she specifically needs. She goes to him because she says, and I quote, "People pay attention to you. People will listen to you. I need a witness of your caliber." And it's like, you are going to this man who was not only your ex, but also your research partner out in Montana for years, and you want him to go into a life or death situation because you want him to bear witness to what it is you're going to be discovering. Honestly, I feel like we should have relayered a whole lot of things, because I feel like they're largely giving too much to Ellie, and in response, not enough to Grant. Because here's one of the things that made being a Jurassic Park fan exciting since the Jurassic World trilogy began. Because Jurassic World reinvigorated the franchise, it had a chance to posthumously give other movies in the franchise a bit of a touch-up. For example, Jurassic Park 3, largely the movie is mostly superfluous if you take it in the grand scheme of things, but because of Jurassic World's PR team, Jurassic Park 3 has been given a new context that makes it more important for the events going forward, because you realize that the events that happened in Jurassic Park 3 shouldn't have happened, because InGen was doing a whole lot of illegal shit that really could have gotten them in a whole lot of trouble. And they were only doing it because Masrani bought them out after John Hammond died in 1998. So, Jurassic Park 3 takes place in 2001, and that's when you realize that they really could have explored those details, the new information that they added to the movies, but they don't. And maybe it's, like I said, one of the biggest problems with critiquing any form of media is complaining that the movie didn't be what you wanted it to be. And that's something that you have to put aside when you want to be objective. That's your subjectivity talking. You have to basically get to a mindset where you can accept the movie for what it is and judge it purely based on its merits and its flaws, instead of thinking what you wanted it to be. But what I'm saying is that there was a huge opportunity there, because Grant, he was a witness to what happened in the events of Jurassic Park 3, he could have told the world about the illegal species that were on the island that shouldn't have been on the island. The Spinosaurus, the Ankylosaurus, the Ceratosaurus, the Corythosaurus, too. These 4 species were not on InGen's original list, and therefore it was illegal for them to have been created after what happened in San Diego. But they were, because Masrani bought the company and was already making the groundwork to build Jurassic World, even as far back as then. But considering that it's been 21 years since Jurassic Park 3, and nothing ever really came of that, I can't help but think that nobody really did listen to Grant when he warned them. The point of what I'm saying is that Grant feels underutilized. He doesn't get humiliated or degraded like most veteran male characters returning to their franchises nowadays, but he doesn't really do anything that other characters couldn't do. So it kind of feels like the movie is trying to fit him in just for the sake of having him. Don't get me wrong, it's a treat to have him, but I honestly would have liked it if he took a more proactive role. This movie is being marketed as the final chapter of the Jurassic saga, and I think that the reason that they're doing that is because they're bridging the gap between Jurassic World and Jurassic Park. And that's what bringing in the legacy characters was about. It's their swan song. It's basically like the resolution of what the story that began with those characters, as well as resolving the story that began with the new characters. However, I sense that the story is actually not over, because the way that this movie ends, it leaves the door open for so many more stories that could come out of this franchise that I honestly don't think that it is going to end with Jurassic World Dominion, and I don't think that it should, because there's so much more potential that could be explored. Like I said, one of the things that's so confusing about this movie is the fact that it feels like they're trying to wrap up consequences. You see, I really hate to say this, but this movie does not feel like the movie that was marketed to us, because this movie felt like a film that was going to explore the dangers and the consequences of what happened at the end of Fallen Kingdom, with dinosaurs now having free run all over the planet, and people trying to exploit them for money. The movie literally starts out like that, with you realizing that there's now a huge underground black market for dinosaurs. Effectively speaking, like, there are people who are capturing these animals in the wild, they're breeding them illegally, and they're selling them for profit. The problem is that when Biosyn gets involved, it feels like Operation Clean Sweep almost, to the point where everything's been handled so efficiently that you feel like that's it. They've already solved the problem. I kind of wanted to see more of the chaos. I wanted to see more of the dinosaurs unable to coexist with human beings, basically encroaching more and more on human territories. I wanted more of that, please. In fact, there's like a huge action set piece that takes place that shows one of these underground dinosaur black markets, and I was basically thinking, this is what the movie needed to be about. I need more of this, because the events of the movie don't shut this operation down, so this operation is going to continue elsewhere. Like, what are you going to do about saving these animals? So So how do I rank this movie? Well, I've been saying it throughout this entire little unscripted rant. It's a Jurassic Park movie. But what do I mean by that? well. Even though this movie doesn't have all that much information or adaptation from either Jurassic Park novel, it is a movie that actually feels a lot like what the original Jurassic Park was. And what that movie was is described by a lot of the people who made the movie. It was a one random encounter from the next. Once you get to the main location of this movie, you start to realize that each interaction that the characters have is really just a means of showcasing the one dinosaur after the next. And they're completely random encounters that don't really mean anything. That can be somewhat disappointing because the Jurassic Park franchise is a masterclass of cause and effect. There's a cause and effect in these movies as well, but you ultimately have to sort of but it's not really as prominent as it is in the other movies. It really does feel like most of what happens is completely random, whereas if you go over the events of the first novel, you see that each action, each effect is a domino, one after another, so it does a good job of showcasing all the new dinosaurs, but that's really roughly about it. I hate to use the term, but it's a bit too much spectacle and not enough substance. So I'm hard pressed to say whether or not I 100% liked the movie. I will say that it's a good movie, but I'll have to give it a few more watches in order to, I guess, get used to the idea. One of the things that really doesn't sit well with me is how underutilized Dodgson was as a character, and the fact that, spoilers, he does in fact get killed at the end of the movie. I feel like that was a mistake. If these movies are going to continue, Dodgson should have been left alive so that we could get a proper adaptation of him going forward. But I feel like they included him as a means of wrapping up his story from the original Jurassic Park. The problem that I really have with it is that the guy who's playing Dodgson, he doesn't come off like how Dodgson was in the novels, nor does he come off like how you would expect the Dodgson we saw in the original Jurassic Park to behave. Because, I mean, I can't really blame the actor that they basically chose for this, because he was basically working with what he was given. The real surprise of this movie came from the fact that one character that I was sure was going to die actually survived. It's one of those things that you expect some kind of karmic punishment for this character, but in a lot of ways you realize that their journey isn't necessarily one about arrogance and being killed for it. It's about being humbled, and so I think that's why this character was allowed to live. He's basically suffered through all of this, and now he's basically kind of trying to redeem himself in a lot of ways. Anyways, so that is my take on Jurassic World Dominion. It's a very different Jurassic Park movie, and that really is what I think a lot of people should take away from this movie. It's different from what we've seen before, while also reinventing similar elements that we've seen before. I just kind of feel like when it came to the trailers for this movie, what we were exposed to, what we saw, it ultimately ended up becoming meaningless in the long run. And that's something that I'll have to talk about more when I start talking about the spoilers for the movie. Because don't get me wrong, I fully intend to keep making Jurassic Park content even now that the movie has been released. Because there's so much more that I want to say. It's just I'd rather keep them condensed to their own videos instead of talking broadly and generally about them. Anyways, hope you guys share your thoughts about the movie down in the comment section below and sort of give your takes on how it happened. This movie, it's flawed, but it's enjoyable. And I'd say that it's definitely better than most of the movies that we're getting out of certain studios nowadays, especially considering that even though a certain character that I didn't expect to be in the movie did come back, I was right. That character was only in the movie for just one scene, and they left the film entirely. So it's kind of like this movie sort of keeping that sort of nonsense away from the franchise, even though they're still technically kind of doing it. But anyways, I'll have to basically talk about that in another video. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you all have a great day, and thanks for choosing. Hope you guys like, share, and subscribe. As always, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Later.